We'll call this meeting to order. My trusty gavel here. This is the joint City Council and Planning Commission meeting. It is 5 p.m. on Tuesday, February 16, 2021. May we please have a roll call?
Yes, Mayor, we'll start with the City Council. Councilmember Hubbard. Oh, excuse me. I don't know if she's still on her. Councilmember Mosca.
Here.
Councilmember Crayons.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Hinsey.
Here.
And Mayor Blake Spear.
Here.
That list is quite old there.
Yes, it is. Record will show that all members of the City Council are present. And then we'll move to the Planning Commission. Chair Ehlers.
Here.
Vice Chair Doyle.
Here.
Commissioner Farrow.
Here.
Commissioner Flicker, I do not see on. And Commissioner Sherrod.
Here.
All right, thank you. All members of the Planning Commission are present with the exception of Commissioner Flicker.
Okay, great. I invite you all to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. So now we will go to our first agenda item, which is City Council and Planning Commission discussion regarding the current status of the 6th cycle housing plan update and draft responses to HCD comments to achieve a state certified housing element by April 15, 2021. And I'll just say before we hand it over to staff that I'm really happy that we're having this meeting because I frequently have heard over my service on the elected city council and as mayor that the commissioners really enjoy joint meetings because it's a way for us all to get on the same page about what are the policy directions that where we're trying to head as a city, and also to take input from you when we're able to have that input matter. So of course, it always matters, but it particularly matters at these types of stages. So we'll be also taking public comment, but we're happy to be having this joint Zoom meeting with the Planning Commission and the City Council so that we could head toward certification and being timely on April 15. So with that, I will hand it over to staff.
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight, we are here to speak on the draft cycle 6 to seek direction on key issues, on some of those issues that are policy issues, and for which we are seeking City Council's direction with Planning Commission's recommendation. This evening, we will be led by Principal Planner Jennifer Gates to provide first a presentation and then to help with discussion. And then Mayor, if I may just make a request, we do have a video that is unrelated to this issue tonight, which sort of helps to explain the planning profession that we would like to ensure that we have the opportunity to show that this evening before we wrap up, if that is okay with you.
Absolutely, you can play it right now if you want or whenever you'd prefer.
Okay, well, if that's the case, I would love to show it now before I turn it over to Jennifer. Karen, if you wouldn't mind.
Hi, I'm Diego.
And I'm Paula. We live in North San Diego County and work for our hometowns as city planners.
And together with your input, we help our beloved communities plan for smart, sustainable growth. It's no secret that North County is an amazing place to live. Our great communities didn't just happen by accident. They are the result of years of careful community planning, requiring collaboration and dialogue between planners like us and city staff, the community, business leaders, developers, and finally, decision makers like elected officials.
You might be asking yourself, what exactly is city planning? Simply put, it's the planning of the construction, growth, and development of a town, city, or urban area. As planners, we are always thinking about the current and future needs of our communities. Our goal is to plan for future growth while balancing history and community character.
Planners have an incredibly important role to play in our city. They have the opportunity to influence and to shape the physical environment where we live, work, and play. planners review and recommend projects based upon whether they meet our applicable laws, regulations, and policies. It's not a matter of whether a project should have one red door or 2 windows, but instead whether the project meets the plain meaning and intent of the laws and plans in place in our city.
Our local policies anchor all of our work. They encourage us to zoom out and keep the big picture in mind. This is important because not many projects are black and white from a planning perspective. There are shades of gray when it comes to the laws and our policies. In these cases, planners need to listen and lean on community input to make the best decisions. We work together to come up with a compromise.
Oftentimes, projects begin when a developer comes to a city wanting to build a project, or we recognize a community need, or we need to comply with state or federal government regulations.
If you see something being built in your community, you may wonder, what is this? And why is it here? Or who approved this? Whether you're in Del Mar or Cambria, there are specific policies in place that guide all planners in all cities throughout California. Every city has a general plan or a community plan that serves as a blueprint or a vision for that community. There are also specific plans that serve as a blueprint for a specific area or neighborhood.
Our aim is always to find solutions that work for everyone. We look to guidance from local planning policies for our decisions, and we focus on the bigger picture.
Planners have long been liaisons to the community, providing that bridge between local government and the constituency it serves. They help these community members understand federal, state, and regional priorities that impact their local communities, and they work with community members to balance these priorities with local concerns.
Most people don't realize that when planners review projects and make recommendations to decision makers regarding their approval, there's often years of planning and sometimes even decades that have gone into those projects. There's a lot of thought and intention behind these planning policies, so even if you don't see the work happening, it's there, just behind the scenes. Again, it's those great planning policies that result in great communities like the ones we enjoy here in North County.
Like Julie said, all cities look to their planning policies to decide what should go where in their city. This ensures that what we're planning makes sense and will work well in the community. We wouldn't put an industrial factory in the middle of a residential area. Instead, we'd rather identify a more appropriate location for the factory in the community.
Planners are always trying to find the right mix of uses for our community. It's a constant balancing act. We have to provide accommodation for growth while still preserving our community character. Where should we put housing, businesses, services, industrial, educational, places of worship, transit? These pieces all have to fit together in order to make the North County a great community.
Not only does a planner review every project against a city's planning policies, they also make a recommendation to the decision makers on nearly every project that is built in the city. These are complicated projects. It's our job to unpack them, provide education and information to the decision makers and the public so it's easier to understand. That's our role, and we're glad to do it in the communities we love.
So now you know a little more about what goes into making our North County communities great. Now, what will you do? We look at you as an expert in being a resident or a business owner in our communities. We challenge you to think about your role in shaping your community. Whether it's volunteering on a city board or commission, providing input on an important city project, or watching a Zoom meeting of a city council meeting, we encourage you to continue to be part of the change you want to see in our communities.
So we thought that bringing forth a video that helped to explain in common terms what our planners do every single day would be helpful for our community, and was especially relevant given the conversation this evening, since it is a Zoom City Council meeting with both our City Council and planning commissioners working collaboratively to help us move toward hopefully an acceptable housing element that we can support. So with that, I do want to turn it over to Jennifer to start with our presentation for this evening. Thank you guys all so much.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me okay? All right, thank you. So good evening, Mayor, City Council, Chair, and Planning Commissioners. Thank you all for tonight's joint study session on the sixth cycle housing element update. Tonight's meeting is focused on providing an update where we are now with the housing element process and what the most recent letter from HCD has stated, and requesting direction on a couple of those items and confirmation of staff's current proposed direction on a few of the other comments that are remaining within HCD's comment letter. So just as background, some of this has been stated before, but it never hurts to keep talking about why we're doing a housing element. So the housing element is every 8 years, the state requires that each jurisdiction updates its housing element to address future housing needs in accordance with the state law. The Department of Housing and Community Development is the agency that is responsible for tracking and determining compliance with the state housing law. On October 8th, 2019, HCD certified the city's housing element for the 2013 to 2021 fifth cycle housing element. The city is currently in the process of updating the housing element for this sixth cycle, which will be from 2021 through 2029. The city will need to adopt an update to the sixth cycle housing element again by April 15th, 2025. So there are consequences for the city if the housing element is adopted after April 15th, 2021, or if the housing element is not in substantial conformance with state law. If the city does not adopt a housing element by April 15th, it will be required to adopt a housing element every 4 years through 2037, or until the city has 2 consecutive on-time adoptions. If the housing element is not in substantial conformance with state law, as determined by HCD, the city will be vulnerable to litigation by the state attorney general and other interested parties. It will potentially be ineligible for state and regional funding and other penalties that were described in attachment 1 of the staff report as prepared by special counsel. The regional housing needs allocation for the sixth cycle is established by HCD and SANDAG with input from local jurisdictions to determine the methodology to the allocation of housing units for the planning period from 2021 through 2029. On November 1st, 2019, HCD approved the methodology developed by SANDAG for the regional housing needs allocation, or RHNA, for the sixth cycle. The final sixth cycle RHNA was approved by SANDAG on July 10th, 2020. The methodology is available on SANDAG's website, which is linked from the staff report and from our project webpage. The sixth cycle methodology developed by SANDAG allocates a total of 1,554 units to Encinitas, of which 838 units are allocated to low and very low income categories. So city staff and the consultant, Kinley Horn, kicked off the update on November 18th, 2019. And this was followed by a City Council Planning Commission study session on December 11th, 2019. A second public workshop was held with the community on February 10th, 2020, and that was focused on some proposed changes that the state wanted discussed, including fair housing. After completion of the initial public outreach, the city formally submitted the first draft of the sixth cycle housing element update in June of 2020 to HCD. On August 27th, the city received formal comments from HCD, which were discussed on the November 16th, 2020 special study session by City Council, along with staff's draft responses. To address the comments received from the community and HCD, staff with the direction from the City Council updated the draft sixth cycle housing element and then submitted to HCD in December of 2020. During HCD's second 60-day review, the city received additional verbal comments from HCD, which staff responded to on January 8th, 2021, and were provided on the city's project webpage. On February 4th, the city received formal comments from HCD, which was attached to this staff report. Additional comments have also been received from the community during this time period, which are included in attachment 4. HCD's comment letter from February 4th provided comments that were organized under 2 main topics: housing needs, resources, and constraints, and housing programs. While a few of the comments are a continuation of previous formal comments, there are new comments based on the recently adopted density bonus and group home permit ordinances, which staff is seeking direction on tonight. Under the housing needs, resources, and constraints, the main focus was on site analysis. A jurisdiction must provide a sufficient amount of adequate sites to accommodate the regional housing needs allocation. In response to the verbal comments in January received from HCD, staff had removed the one Armstrong parcel that contains the Armstrong Nursery and increased the potential ADU developments in the city. HCD's comment in the February 4th letter stated that Fox Point Farms approval should be reflected in the site's analysis. City Council approved the Fox Point Farms project on January 27th, 2021. So table 2.3 on page 113 of section 1 will be updated to reflect the approval of Fox Point Farms. This is the revised table with the approved Fox Point Farms project incorporated. This table shows the city's progress in meeting its RHNA obligation in all income categories through approved projects and units currently under construction through December of 2020. So Fox Point Farms, or Ector property, was removed from the potential site capacity under existing residentially zoned properties and provided up here under units entitled or under construction during the projection periods. They were added under their categories of very low as well as above moderate income. The city has calculated the total number of units affordable to lower income households that can be accommodated in the city is equal to 1,605 units and will result in a total buffer of at least 855 units. This is over 100% of the city's 838 unit RHNA obligation. Staff also wanted to go over no net loss together. So the city is required to track development by income level pursuant to Government Code Section 65863. If an approval of a development results in a reduction below the number of units needed by income category, the city is required to identify and, if necessary, rezone additional sites within 180 days. Given the no net loss provision, the city included a surplus of units or a buffer as identified in that previous slide. In addition, the city recognizes its obligation to the continuation of Program 1E, which is to ensure that adequate sites remain available throughout the planning period. Any site rezoned will satisfy the adequate site requirements of the government code and will be consistent with the city's obligation to affirmatively further fair housing, which is reflected in the update of this program in response to HCD's earlier comment. This is an example of no net loss, which applies to the units for lower and moderate income households. The finding includes quantification of the remaining unmet need for a jurisdiction share of the regional housing need at each income level and the remaining capacity of sites identified in the housing element that would be needed to accommodate that income level. So this site is showing just an example of what maybe a proposed housing element site that was proposed at 100 low income units. And then a project was presented that only provided 20 low income units and 80 above mod units. And this is how the math would work to get down to the bottom, which is the total capacity over the RHNA. So we're gonna look at, as of today, there was 855 is our buffer. And so if a project was approved that had 80 less low income units, this would be deducted from that buffer. So we would have 775 units of our buffer remaining. So now talking about some of the housing programs that were in the comment letter. So HCD's February 4th letter is asserting that the density bonus ordinance that was passed in December 2020 is in conflict with state law, and that the city must modify the program to immediately remove or suspend the ordinance and apply current state density bonus law until the city's density bonus ordinance is appropriately amended to be in compliance. The city had responded to HCD's verbal comments regarding this concern over the density bonus ordinance, and in addition provided a letter prepared by special counsel on February 1st. The letter had been received from HCD on December 16th to City Council during the density bonus ordinance discussion. The response letter is provided with the staff report as attachment 6. Staff, in consultation with legal counsel, believes the provisions in the ordinance do conform with state law and will incentivize affordable housing or residential development within the city. The city currently has 12 active density bonus applications and has approved 34 density bonus applications. Staff is requesting direction from City Council on if and how it would like to amend this program. Also in the February 4th letter, HCD is asserting that the group home permit ordinance passed in December discriminates against persons with disabilities and is inconsistent with state law. HCD states that Program 2E should be revised and immediately remove or suspend the ordinance for the group home permit and uphold current state laws regarding fair and equal treatment of persons with disabilities without discrimination in land use. City staff, in consultation with City Attorney's Office, believes the ordinance does not discriminate against persons with disabilities, but instead provides a reasonable accommodation to persons with disabilities and an opportunity for group homes to operate in single-family residences. It was modeled after similar ordinances that have been upheld in court decisions involving other cities in Southern California. And staff is requesting a direction on if and how to amend this program. For Program 3D, HCD has requested an update to include a commitment to post additional analysis that's being required by our environmental assessment that was completed for the 5th cycle, and to place that information on the city's website along with detailed objective standards required by these studies. So staff proposes to provide more information about the studies identified in the EA or environmental assessment on our city's website within 6 months as requested, and explain that mitigation measures that are identified should be site-specific and would be dependent upon the impact that is identified, if there is one at all. The last comment provided by HCD involves the city's citizen participation process, or CPP. And then HCD has asked that Program 3F be revised to provide certainty that decision-making bodies are only considering objective standards and use the objective processes during deliberations for by right review, or that the city amend its approval process for by right projects to exempt them from CPP or other public hearings, and that the Director of Development Services or other staff has the decision-making authority for the by right design review. Program 3F already states the decision-making body will consider objective standards. However, staff is proposing to add clarification within the objectives for that program regarding CPP process. Staff does not recommend exempting by right projects from a CPP or modifying the decision-making authority for design review. HCD's technical assistance guide states specifically that a hearing body such as Planning Commission can call for a proponent of a by right project to make design modifications. In addition, HCD has requested that 3F be modified to include a monitoring program for the CPP process and design review process for by right projects to ensure that only the objective processes or standards are used. HCD has also stated that all programs should be monitored involving regulatory framework. Many of our housing element programs involving regulations with amendments being completed within or already monitoring and require amendments to be completed within 1 year of the identification of a constraint. staff is proposing to add a monitoring objective and timeframe for program 3F or others as needed to meet this request. So the next steps is to take direction from City Council and Planning Commission tonight. Staff and the consultant will complete the responses to HCD comments and bring forward the draft housing element for review and consideration and recommendation by the Planning Commission on March 4th, 2021. And following recommendation by the Planning Commission will be presented to City Council. So tonight's recommendation is to discuss the 6th cycle housing element update in response to the comments and provide direction to staff. And that concludes staff's presentation, and Barbara Couts with our special counsel is also on the call. And then I believe Nick Chin with Kimley Horn is also on today's call, and we are available to answer any questions.
Okay, well, thank you for that report. We'll take preliminary questions from council or planning commissioners, and then we'll go to the public comments, and then we'll come back for our comments. So does anybody want to make a preliminary question for staff? I don't see any hands up. There we go. There's one. Councilmember Mosca.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Jennifer. Excellent presentation. Two fast questions. What is the objection again with the Armstrong parcel? It seems to be that this parcel was originally on our inventory list for the 5th cycle. Then it came off at the request of HCD. Then it went back on, and now it's being taken off again. Just wondering what the real issue here with Armstrong is. It seems like there's some inclination to develop low-income housing there. I'm not sure why they're so insisting on taking it off, especially since we have such a large buffer. It's not like we're relying on something and that we need it. Second question too is just regarding the EA, the objective standards or the guidance that HCD is looking for us to put onto the website. Just looking for a bit more information about if we put that type of information on our website, what else do we put there in terms of ensuring that there's not complete reliance on information that may not be relevant to each developer. These are fact-specific situations, and some things may be looked at on some parcels and maybe not on other parcels. And so do we work with legal counsel to put provisos in that guidance that says, this is very case specific? Just wanted to hear about what we would be doing in that situation.
Sure. So the first question in regards to the Armstrong parcels. So in the 5th cycle, Armstrong consists of 2 parcels, by the way. One's vacant and one has the Armstrong nursery on it. So during the 5th cycle, HCD would not accept the units proposed there because of a time consideration for development of those sites, and they had not provided a letter of interest to move forward at that time and during the 5th cycle. During the 6th cycle, we presented those 2 sites as available and part of our sites analysis, given the time frame for the 6th cycle to develop versus the previous time. I think I wasn't here then, obviously, but I think we only had maybe 3 or 4 years left within that 5th cycle. And then when presented to HCD, we presented both parcels. HCD's response was that the Armstrong nursery has a very strong historic use and has been used as a nursery for a long period of time, and did not feel that there was not an understanding that that site would ever be developed, but the vacant parcel has that potential to be developed in the near future in this current 8-year cycle. And then on the objective standards, the environmental analysis that was completed for the 5th cycle actually identified the sites that would potentially have additional studies to be required for those sites. And those are related to the potential for biological resources as well as cultural resources. So they had a higher potential to have those types of resources on that site. So we will actually take the information from the EA, which is on our website, by the way, already. But we'll pull the information out in regards to how to apply these study requests. The EA also identifies which mitigation measures would be required for these sites when a significant impact is identified. So all that information basically is already provided in the EA and will be pulled out of the EA. Our zoning code, we actually have an overlay that identifies these sites already as being requiring special studies. So this was just a response to a comment provided by HCD for a specific overlay description and what that, making sure that our community and the sites developers actually know about these requirements that are in the EA.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Farrow?
Thank you, Mary Blakespear. I have a question regarding, this may be something we've already talked about or know about, but what are the state mandated criteria for site selection? So we're, to make much, this is for the public's benefit too, is we're having sites that are spot zoned and they're vacant sites. And I'm trying to better understand myself and to share this with why are we choosing vacant sites that would seem to be auto-reliant? And why aren't we choosing sites that are in more walkable areas that already have mass transit?
So there's a few things that go into the state mandated criteria, and I'm going to ask Nick and Barbara to help me with the specifics, more specifics, but some of the main things are that it has to be zoned, if it's not already zoned, for the minimum of R30. And that was a requirement that is in the state law. It also has to meet a minimum dwelling unit. So there's certain vacant lots that may be available. However, they may not be large enough to meet the minimum dwelling units that are required for that site. And a certain percentage of the sites that are identified do need to be vacant to be listed as part of this sites analysis. Go. Nick, want to add more?
It was kind of, Brett, it was kind of pursuant to a series of laws that passed that former Governor Brown signed, I think around 2018. The analysis Jennifer just went through in terms of the Armstrong site is kind of what you get with sites that are improved, that are non-vacant sites. There's going to be heightened scrutiny, and Barbara can probably talk a little bit more about the heightened scrutiny and how many non-vacant versus vacant sites you need on your housing inventory list, because that was pursuant to state law that changed.
Did you want me to add? The state laws. First of all, access to transit is not a criterion in state law. The state law is primarily interested in sites where there's evidence that they can actually be developed in the 8-year period. So obviously vacant sites are somewhat easier to develop than a site that's already developed. If more than half of the city's lower income sites are non-vacant sites, then it's assumed that the existing uses are an impediment to development unless the city has substantial evidence that they will be developed, which is difficult to do. HCD also applies a much more stringent analysis of non-vacant sites than vacant sites. The city has to develop a methodology that looks at past experience converting existing uses to higher density development, current market demand for the existing use, analysis of leases that might prevent development, development trends, market conditions, and regulatory or other incentives. So there is a big push within the housing element law to use vacant sites rather than non-vacant sites. Another problem, of course, is that, as Jennifer said, the sites need to be zoned for 30 units an acre to be considered suitable for lower income housing. And any designating new sites right now would require a vote, which would probably make it impossible to adopt the housing element on time.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that matches my understanding. I just kind of want to bring that out again to the public to understand why we have these sites we're working with now. Thank you.
Thank you. Commission Chair Ehlers.
Yeah, I'll keep my questions to clarification. So the table on page 3 of the staff report shows the adequate sites inventory, kind of the spreadsheet. And Jennifer, I was looking at the buffer, the 855, and I guess my question is, I'm trying to understand the adequacy of that buffer and how long it's likely to last us, and whether our policies need modification in order to make it last longer. Can you, and I understand that Fox Point has been accounted for in there, so it's essentially taken out, not including Fox Point, how many R30 applications are currently in process? And if they go through to approval, what will the net impact on that 855 buffer be?
So there's a few questions in there. So the first question, or the first aspect of this is, so the existing residentially zoned properties under the very low income, there's 1,355 units identified in the remaining sites that have been identified for very low income.
Okay.
So those 14 sites remaining. Then we have a projected ADU construction of 250 over that 8-year period, and that's what gives us our buffer of 855 units. I'm gonna bring that. So this is the one we're talking about. I don't have the exact numbers. I believe what was in the most recent housing element identified 6 remaining housing element sites that were identified as having submitted an application and are currently under review. And I'm trying to bring up what that total number of units. It was in Appendix B, and it provided the number proposed currently. The other aspect is, as you were talking about, is in regards to our no net loss. And our city is required to continue to track the development all throughout the city, regardless of if it's an R30 site or not. So we are every year required to present to HCD what our status is and our number of building permits that are being issued. And we continue to track projects. And so that's where that 88 number is coming from, our projects that have currently been entitled or are under construction in that very low and low income that are currently in process for 2020. So we are continuing to track that, and that'll be utilized when we are understanding what that buffer is remaining as projects are approved.
Oh, okay, but that is as of entitled projects today, correct? Including Fox Point Farms.
That is correct.
Okay, so, and you said there were 6 with submitted apps, and presumably they've been submitted at some preliminary plan. And what I'm trying to understand is, if we continue our policy of 10% or 15% inclusionary, whether it's very low or low income, where is that going to leave us, or does that call for a change in the policy? That's where I'm going. And so I'm trying to get the data out there from this, and I don't see that data, and I think it'll come up later in our discussions.
I need to look it up unless Roy's looked it up while we were talking. It's in Appendix see what the exact number is that's currently being proposed. Some of the projects are proposing a 20% low income category, and I would need to look at those exact numbers of what's being presented today to get to the inclusionary aspect that you're referencing. But as you know, the Fox Point Farms was at, I think, almost 15% at very low, and then a number of the projects being presented are at 20% low. For the 6th cycle.
Maybe it's something, you know, my gut tells me we're going to use up that 855 before then, so we can talk about it later when we get into actual policy discussion. But, and if Roy has a chance to pull up those Appendix B figures, I think it would be very, very germane and helpful. And to me, it gets to the crux of the issue, one of the main issues in the current and past policy.
Okay, thank you. Is that the end of your questions for the moment?
Yep.
Yes. Okay, Deputy Mayor Crayons.
Yes, thank you. I would like to follow up Bruce's clarification questions by getting a clear understanding of the no net loss implementation. You know, is it at entitlement or is it post-construction? I'm not so worried about it with the Ector site, because a lot of those units are for sale and it's a different product type. But some of the projects that are in the pipeline are for rent units. And I know that the for rent units, given the size of the units, could in fact be affordable by design, or at least close enough to it. They will also have a different fluctuation based upon market conditions. And so it seems to me that at entitlement is not the best time to have to make these no net loss calculations. Can you, Barbara, point to the government code that requires that we do this adjustment, make these no net loss calculations at entitlement?
Yes, it's Government Code Section 65863, which I'm just looking up. And it is, yeah, unfortunately, you need to make the findings at the entitlement.
And so what happens when construction is complete and we're finding different, or we're tracking the market rates of these apartment units? Is there a process that we can go by to make the adjustments in the no net loss?
Yes, you could. The city is supposed to report to HCD every year. It fills out a housing element annual report, and you can show units by income category, but they don't need to be deed restricted. If they're actually affordable to people in a certain income category, you can show them in that income category and basically kind of adjust your numbers or your totals. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Because the no net loss really involves two things. One is keeping very good track of how many units are built in the city and how many affordable units. For instance, the city has affordable units in some projects that are not R30 sites, so it should keep track of those. Those would be additions once they're approved. And then also at construction, if the city finds that the units are in fact affordable, it can start making adjustments.
And there's often a point made of the fact that we calculate using 100% of the units. Our arena for low and very low is based upon 100% of the units, and because of the cost of dirt in our city, many people recognize that it's likely that 80% of them are going to be above low or very low income. So is there, what is it that state law, we're following state law by using 100% of the units, and should we be doing this differently, I guess is the question. And maybe that's a policy discussion that we should be taking up so that we have a little bit more realistic numbers. But Barbara, are we following state law when we use the 100% of the units?
Yes.
That? are calculated?
You are following state law. State law requires that the sites have the capacity to accommodate your low-income RHNA. It's also problematic because there is not enough money in the state for every city and county in the state to build all its low-income RHNA. I mean, that's truth. HCD has a technical guide to preparing the housing element that suggests only a 20 or 30% buffer. The city's buffer is obviously, it's close to 100% buffer. But I think this will be more and more of a problem that cities experience as development occurs.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to let everyone ask one series of questions before going on round two. Councilmember Moscow, so I'm going to call on Commissioner Sherrod.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question. Why with the huge buffer that we have, when we look at our population, we really don't need that huge buffer. And also when we look at HCD requirements, we don't need that huge buffer. If we keep that buffer, if we keep that huge buffer, every bit of that will be built out by developers, I promise you. And I just wonder if that's our objective. Do we really want to build a lot of market rate housing? Because I see that some other cities sometimes take a look at their population, and we have different demographics in different cities. We do have about 64% of our seniors in our city that have lower income. And so I wondered, I don't know if this is possible, so I'm bringing it up and asking, is it possible? Is it possible for us to look at, let's say, let's focus on building some affordable housing for seniors in our community, since we have a lot of seniors who are in the category of needing affordability. Can we do that, or would that be, not allowed by HCD? Or for example, we have a community college in our city, right? And so could we, for example, focus on that particular population, college students who may need an affordable situation, whether rental or first-time buyer or whatever? Can we focus on certain areas that we actually have that live in our city? That's one of my questions.
Let's see. Yes, the city can focus on certain on developing affordable housing in the city. In fact, in terms of the issues about the buffer and using up the buffer, the best way to protect the buffer, if you like, would be if the city could actually achieve in developing an affordable housing project. One of the difficulties that the city has experienced is that for an affordable project to get state tax credits, which is how most of them are financed, almost always substantial city funds are required for the project to be competitive, because there's much more demand for affordable housing and for affordable housing funds than there is money. And to date, the city doesn't have that kind of source of money. So that's been one major impediment to the city's actually developing affordable housing. In terms of focusing on certain groups, there's various fair housing laws, so the city would need to be careful, but let us say that somebody proposes a senior citizen project, that would be fine. Or if the community college should propose developing housing on its site and requested the city for assistance, that's also permitted. So all of those ideas are very good. In terms of reducing the buffer, the reason the city has such a large buffer is because, as Councilmember Krantz said, developers have proposed projects in many of the sites, but removing the buffer would not result in any changes in the zoning, because right now, under SB 330, the Housing Crisis Act, the city cannot downzone any sites unless it upzones sites simultaneously or concurrently. So at this point, it's best to leave those sites in as a buffer so that the city is not required to do further upzoning or to contact HCD again about whether sites are adequate. if it runs out of sites. So that's a major reason why the city has such a large buffer.
Thank you. Councilmember Hinsey.
To follow up on that line of questioning in the interest of preserving our buffer, in Encinitas, we have a lot of affordability just by age and, multifamily that were built and developed before the city incorporated. If the city in future housing cycles pursues a strategy that we're attempting to formalize that affordable housing and make it deed restricted affordable, is that also a strategy that we wouldn't have to look to upzone other sites?
Yes, the city can satisfy up to 25% of its lower income requirement by converting by two things. One is that if you had an affordable project where the affordability was expiring and the city acted to make that housing affordable, city could do that. It can also buy a market rate project that is where the rents are currently either above low income or above very low income, and then and keep it affordable. But the city has to somewhat lower the incomes from the existing incomes, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Councilmember Mosca.
And thank you. Susan, just to close the gap there from what Barbara was saying, that the city upzoned those sites under cycle 5 because of the responsibility we had under 5. But when you look at 6, it's a lesser responsibility, and we would never have upzoned that many sites for cycle 6 had we not already done that under cycle 5. So this is just sites rolling over that were never that never went to development under cycle 5 because we complied only at the end of the cycle 5 period. I just wanted to kind of jump in real fast and just comment. I thought all of the questions and comments are really good, but I also wanted to just focus on Commissioner Farrow's comment about this kind of vacant versus non-vacant site, and when those laws passed and signed by the governor, what happened in the 5th cycle, where we were basically, really looking for, the vacant sites became a premium, and we're looking at vacant sites because of the fact that we were at the end of the cycle, and it really was hard for us to comply with these new laws. But I think it's important to note, because I think everything that Brett talked about are questions that I get all the time from residents. Why on vacant sites as opposed to sites that are already disturbed, if you will, and sites that are on our high traffic corridors or near transit. And I think those are perfectly good comments. And I hope that in the future, speaking just for myself, that my hope for future cycles is that we're basically citing these parcels. We're putting the density where we can most handle it, which is on the high traffic corridors and near transit, and not in some of our most rural part of our city where we can least handle the density. And that really means that we have to work harder to identify parcels and make sure we're doing everything we need to do to line up and make sure those parcels are capable of passing the scrutiny of HCD. Because I don't think, like Barbara just said, I don't think that the law says that you cannot identify non-vacant parcels. It just means that there's higher scrutiny. That means that we have to work with the property owners. That means that we have to identify parcels that are good for development, high density development, and work with those property owners to make sure that there's a meeting of the minds and make sure that all of this work is done so that we're not basically looking at identifying parcels that can least handle the density as we have done in the past. And so going forward, I'm hoping that whole vacant versus non-vacant, that we're really kind of trying to do more planning to identify parcels on high traffic corridors and where transit is to put this density. Of course, as Barbara was saying, to the extent that the city can do its own public 100% or nearly 100% project, affordable housing project, that would be even better for us to be able to lessen the responsibilities that we have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Doyle, do you have your hand up?
I do. I actually have a quick question for Jennifer Gates. And it has to do with the adequate sites inventory list. And I'm looking at the projected ADU construction specifically. So we're projecting like 125 units a year for 8 years. Is this optimistic, pessimistic? How did we arrive at these numbers?
The numbers are actually based on our current ADU building permits and also what is currently being presented through our what's called our H forms. It's our housing survey forms that are provided and are required for each new unit in the city, and it identifies what that rent is that they will be asking for if it's going to be rented. And so that's for single family developments, any kind of development, including ADUs. And so when we take that information along with a survey that was completed in 2018 of ADUs, we are leaning towards a conservative estimate of 125 ADUs a year. I think, I don't have that number right in front of me, but I think this year we were right at 120.
Okay, a quick follow-up question. Now this concerns how these numbers would affect the buffer. Let's say we were able to aggressively increase these. Let's say instead of 250 very low income, we ended up with 400. Would that 150 extra go towards our buffer?
So as, yes, each development in the city is going to go towards our buffer, any development of new units. And we will continue to track. And so that report that we provide to HCD every April takes into account all development that occurs in the city within that year. So all building permits issued. And then we state whether or not it's a deed restricted unit or other. For that income level, and the other is determined based on their H form. And so in that report that will be available, we'll be going to council at the end of March 24th with that report. And that will actually, if you look at the details, it'll say the address and it'll identify where that unit falls within each income category, and then whether or not a survey was provided to support that income. And that unit is then calculated and provided to the HCD and added into our summary table of how we're meeting our RENA every year.
So I do understand that, but just to clarify, though, if we had built extra ADUs, they would be added to the buffers. Is that
yes, we will add them. They will continue to support our buffer.
Cool. That's all I needed to ask. Thank you.
For that income level, and the other is determined based on their H form. And so in that report that will be available, we'll be going to council at the end of March 24th with that report. And that will actually, if you look at the details, it'll say the address and it'll identify where that unit falls within each income category, and then whether or not a survey was provided to support that income. And that unit is then calculated and provided to the HCD and added into our summary table of how we're meeting our RENA every year.
So I do understand that, but just to clarify, though, if we had built extra ADUs, they would be added to the buffers.
Yes, we will add them. They'll continue to support our buffer.
Well, that's all I needed to ask. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And the other, Commissioner Flicker. Form. And so I think you need to mute available. We'll be going to council. Thank you.
Okay, so we're gonna I'm gonna call on the two commissioners who have their hands up, and then I'll make a couple of comments, and then we're gonna go to the public comments. So a council member or Commissioner Sherrod.
Thank you. So I just wanted to clarify something, that although HCD doesn't require the development of affordable units to be near transit, California state policy does encourage it, and also SANDAG in the development of those RHNA numbers. My understanding was SANDAG did put that transit requirement as part of the policy. I'm confused about the transit still.
Let's see. Generally, I mean, from a practical standpoint, for an affordable project in a community like Encinitas to get state funding, you would need to have some kind of access to transit. So we're talking about that versus the criteria for a site to be considered an adequate lower income site for purposes of the housing element. And for those purposes, transit access is not listed as a criteria. The criteria tend to be focused on the probability that the site will actually be developed.
It seems quite a disconnect to me because the state overall, we're fighting greenhouse gases, climate change. We don't want to develop undeveloped land that combats climate change. We want things to be transit oriented, developed, and we want affordable housing. And we know that people that need affordable housing will benefit by being close to mass transit that's public. So I feel there's a real disconnect, and I'm really not sure what we can do to make that work better for us as a city. But I'm feeling there's a definite problem there.
Okay, thank you. Commission Chair Ehlers.
There we go. I wanted to follow on to Kevin's question about ADUs. So for Jennifer, the comment that, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that we build 100 more or 500 more ADUs in this coming year or cycle, we will get credit for, I think it's 23%, but somewhere between 20 and 25% based on whatever the latest survey is for our RENA numbers. But I thought in the fifth cycle, we actually could only count the ADU progress we'd made in the fourth cycle, and that was what we used in the beginning of the fifth cycle, and we didn't get to update those numbers. Did that methodology change so that each year we can actually look at our actual ADU that are the portion that are low income and take direct credit for it during the same cycle?
I am not sure what happened in the fifth cycle, and maybe Barbara can talk to that aspect, but I do know that we do take credit when we submit the survey information, the annual survey to HCD. We do take credit for all construction of units at each income level as a reduction in our RENA, or as meeting our RENA requirements.
And that's based on each year. And I'm trying to understand how do we get the income level for each new ADU each year?
So when we issue a building permit, we require an H form or a housing survey in which they have identified what their rent is going to be for that unit.
Okay. So, and typically we're seeing what kind of percentage of ADUs being built that are qualifying for RENA?
It was consistent with that survey that was completed in 2018, around 23%, I think.
Okay. So we are getting credit each year is what you're saying. So, okay, good.
I think Barbara wanted to answer something about the ADU calculation. Do you want to jump in here?
I was just going to add that.
And that's based on each year.
We did.
I'm trying to, how do we?
I'm getting some kind of feedback, but anyway, we did really count the ADUs in the same way that they're being counted now, but the number was smaller. And you may recall that near the end of our negotiations with HCD, the city was experiencing an increase in the number of ADUs and did increase its projections for ADUs. So the main difference is that the laws have changed. There's a lot more ADUs being constructed. And I also will say that HCD has become much more tolerant or forgiving in terms of allowing cities to count more ADUs if they wish.
Mayor Blakespear, I have noticed Commissioner Flicker waving her hands and appearing quite exasperated. Is she on your screen?
Yeah, I was just about to
okay, good.
Attempt to deal with that. I see that she would like to speak. I'm clicking ask to unmute. I don't know if you're watching it on the screen, Amy, but it seems like the feedback that we're getting from your screen is a little delayed. So the stuff we're hearing live isn't delayed. So, and I was going to suggest that you might talk to IT to try to work this out. Is there, could IT pipe up with a phone number she could call you? Does that work for you, Amy? Yes. IT? Hello? All right, well, I'm going to let that.
Maybe
yes?
Jennifer could stop sharing the screen so that we could have everybody on the same. Yeah, that'd be good.
Okay. Well, I'm going to make a few comments and offer some thoughts. So one of them is that I think this is all really great that we're having this conversation and airing some of these questions and having kind of a workshop. But I also want to make sure that the Planning Commission and the Council are focused on the question before us right now. So, you know, there's 2 months, we have 2 months between now and when the City Council needs to certify a housing element if we want to stay on time. And, you know, there are consequences to not being on time, and we faced those really substantially before with a court order and lawsuits and a lot of different negative consequences. So I heard in the staff report and read in the staff report as well, an identification of the density bonus ordinance and the sober living ordinance, and then some other kind of more smaller but more technical things that we could potentially offer any thoughts on. So I want to make sure that if anybody who's on this right now has thoughts on those things, that you speak to them, because I think that is the part that's before us right now. And then in terms of some of the earlier comments from commissioners seem to be headed toward this idea that the buffer wasn't going to be big enough because we would be running through it too quickly. So maybe a suggestion that we should upzone more. And then later comments were saying everything that's upzoned is going to result in development and we should really upzone less. Can we take any of these away? And I just want to point out those realities, which were already somewhat pointed out, but if we were to upzone more, we would have to go to a vote of the people. And we clearly don't have time to do that in 2 months. And we can't downzone without identifying other sites. And in many ways, that's proven to be extremely impractical in Encinitas. So I don't think it's really on the table to do more upzoning or less upzoning. And I am tremendously grateful that we actually have 100% buffer, because we upzone this amount under court order as required by HCD. And that was for the 5th cycle. And we didn't know at that time that it would actually cover all of the 6th cycle. I think there were a number of us who were deeply concerned that we would be upzoning another 15 sites in our community for the 6th cycle. So, you know, the real wash of relief that we weren't going to have to do that in the 6th cycle because of the methodology that Sandag put together and how the numbers, you know, pop out of the machine, basically, when you put in the criteria of transit and jobs, resulted in this number being what it is. And so to me, when I look at the fact that we need to provide or create 838 low or very low income units in the next 8 years, I think, to me, that seems doable. And I want to point out to everybody that we as a council have prioritized as one of our top projects for this year to find a site that we could potentially have affordable housing, 100% affordable housing project on it. And so the city staff is working to try to identify a site or identify multiple sites to bring to the council for discussion so that we could actually move forward with something that would be 100% or near 100% affordable. And I think one of the things that's always stopped us is this notion that there's no money. How are we going to possibly fund this? But I think the council's direction to staff has said, we identify this as a good and it's something positive for our community. So let's figure out the financing after and see if things change, because state law and the pools that the state puts into this kind of the money that they put into these pools is highly variable. So some years I was looking at some data that showed that affordable housing was funded at the state level 2.5 billion, and it's fallen to 500 million. And so you can imagine a scenario where there's a recognition that there needs to be more state money available for affordable housing projects, and we would be able to tap into that if we have a project. And it's the exact same application we have for our projects, our infrastructure projects, where it's like, if you have shovel-ready projects, you can get the money for them. But if you don't have a shovel-ready project, and if you look at housing, we don't have a shovel-ready project. We have not identified a site for an 100% affordable project or near that, if we could make that step as a community, that would be really substantial. So I am looking forward to that. And I think in this 8-year planning period that we have a very high likelihood of succeeding there, because we do have, it will undoubtedly be controversial, but we do have, I think, a broad consensus that it would be a good idea for us to prioritize as a city the creation of more affordable housing and for it to be an actual project that we take on. So I see Bruce's hand has gone up, but I do really want to move this along because we do have a lot of public comments. So so we will get back. I'm going to call on you, Chair Ehlers, but then we will get back to the rest of the comments about the other things after the public comments. So go ahead with your
Yeah, my only comment was you made the assumption that it required more upzoning, where I think if we get more low-income units out of the existing zoning we have or the existing ADUs we have, that's what we really need to do. That's the only comment I want to make. Thank you.
I totally support that. So yeah, thank you for clarifying that that's where you were going with that. Okay, so let's go ahead and call on the public comments. And I just want to make sure that if IT is on here and you could give Amy a phone number so she could call you.
They're going to reach out. I've talked to IT. They're going to reach out to Amy and help her out.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, so we do have 8 registered to speak. And let me just get to my participant list here. And it looks like we only have 6 that are available. So our first speaker is Patricia Vasquez. Patricia, you can start speaking. You do have 3 minutes.
Hi, good evening. As you've observed in recent council and commission meetings, residents of Northwest Leucadia are seeking action from our city leaders to address traffic and public safety issues on La Costa Avenue corridor. We've become acutely aware of the huge waves of development being proposed for our small neighborhood, which will undoubtedly make a dangerous situation even worse. The tipping point for my neighbors and me was the construction of the Alila Maria Hotel, as traffic and public safety were clearly not prioritized for that development. In fact, the development resulted in 2 crosswalks that pre-existed its development actually being removed at La Costa and 101, now forcing pedestrians headed to the beach to walk directly in front of the flow of traffic going into and out of the hotel. I'd like to remind you that La Costa Avenue west of the I-5 is a residential neighborhood with many homes and driveways directly located on the street. And although we reside just a few blocks from the beach, the lack of basic infrastructure forces us to make the difficult decision to either endanger our lives walking or cycling or on unprotected paths, or adding to traffic congestion by driving our cars a short distance. If you wish to fully appreciate this situation, a walk on the 5 freeway to the beach via La Costa Avenue will allow you to quickly understand our concerns. Please also bear in mind that La Costa Avenue is the only legal path to the beach for our neighborhood, since there are no rail crossings between La Costa Boulevard and Leucadia Boulevard and La Costa Avenue. As was suggested in a meeting my neighbors and I held with Mayor Blakespear and Deputy Mayor Krantz last November, I have provided you with the results of a survey representing the opinions of 135 Northwest Leucadia residents, which prioritizes traffic and public safety needs along La Costa Avenue corridor. We urge you as city leaders to address these urgent traffic and public safety needs before allowing any further hotel, housing, or retail developments to proceed in Northwest Leucadia. We ask that you start funding these projects as soon as possible so that work may begin in 2022. Thank you in advance for taking action on this important matter.
Thank you. And then Amy, IT is trying to reach you. They're trying to call you. Next speaker is Darcy Lyons. Darcy, you have 3 minutes. You can start speaking when ready. Darcy, you just need to unmute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Now we can hear you. You can start when ready.
All right, thank you. I would also like to address the lack of infrastructure for newly proposed developments in Northwest Leucadia. La Costa Avenue currently has a level of service rating of F, the lowest rating available. The road was built to handle a capacity of 14,000 average daily trips, but currently exceeds that by at least 1,000 per day. According to City Traffic Engineer Bob Goralka, the projected traffic volume on La Costa with the addition of the Maria Hotel and proposed 4 developments in the corridor will be up to 22,800 trips per day. This is nearly 9,000 more than La Costa's intended capacity and does not even take into consideration the multiple developments in Carlsbad proposed for Ponto Beach, which will also use La Costa for access. Based on the traffic analysis conducted by the developer for 1967 North Vulcan Avenue, this apartment project would result in exceeding the significance thresholds designated by the city housing element and requires La Costa to be widened to 4 lanes. This is only one project's traffic study and does not take into consideration additional traffic from the hotel and other proposed projects. Based upon the information received from Mayor Blakespear and Deputy Mayor Kranz in a Zoom meeting held in November for neighbors concerned about these developments, the city has no intention of widening La Costa to 4 lanes. They stated they do not have the budget nor the desire to address eminent domain required to widen the road. If there is no plan to widen the road, how will the infrastructure support these new bonus density projects? We have heard from the city countless times that their hands are tied due to SB 330. However, the law states that cities can impose a moratorium on these developments in order to protect against imminent threats to public health and safety. By allowing nearly double the volume of traffic that La Costa was designed to handle, the city is imminently risking the health and safety of all that use this road, pedestrians, cyclists, and drivers alike. The potential for willful negligence lawsuits is very real. If the city moves ahead with these projects and does not conduct a circulation analysis prior to project approval, the city should place a temporary moratorium on development along this corridor until a cumulative traffic analysis can be performed. An objective analysis is absolutely necessary in order to assess the feasibility of the proposed projects along the corridor. This approach places the safety of the community first and will give more clear direction to what size types of projects can be safely developed in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Peter Stern. Peter, you have 3 minutes and you can start when you are ready.
Good evening, everybody. I just want to speak briefly in general about a few things, including the forthcoming, I believe, discussion of the fee in lieu. I don't believe we should approve any sort of fee in lieu, and I think it's the height of hypocrisy to look at having people pay to not build affordable housing, while at the same time we consider installing an equity committee. If we really want to create economic and social equity and justice in this country, we have to integrate our low and moderate housing amongst all of us. We have 20% thresholds. They clearly could be 25%. Moreover, our building code provides numerous ways for affordable housing not to be built. The accessory dwelling units, rental units, and a host of credits and off-site projects. I personally object to off-site 100% affordable housing projects. They carry stigma, they destroy micro communities, and they go nothing towards equality, egalitarianism. So I have written to the planning commissioners and to the city council, who will have access to the planning commissioners' material, regarding the numerous reasons why fee in lieu doesn't work. I've cited a couple of articles there where those articles show and demonstrate, one using, I believe, Santa Monica, and another one looking at San Diego, as well as a host of other communities across the country, where the fee in lieu actually works against building affordable housing. So I hope you'll reconsider the fee in lieu. In the past, it would not be applicable to zoning R30 and up. It should not be applicable anywhere in our system, our zoning complex. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. Our next speaker is William Fleck. William, you can start when ready. You do have 3 minutes. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry about that.
That's okay.
I am speaking, I guess, in regards specifically to the Gaffney-Goodston project on Rancho Santa Fe Road and Encinitas Boulevard. And I'm trying to understand from a resident perspective that we see a lot of issues. I know a lot of the residents of Leavenhaven are very concerned about this project going in. And when I look at the city's, I'm looking at a chart, table C5 from the city's housing element update. Maybe this is a question for Jennifer Gates, but on that I see a projected unit yield of 149 units, but currently Goodson has proposed 283 units, which is 190% of the R30 yield for that property. So what I'm trying to understand is, and on that, it's of those 283 units that Goodson wants to build, again, almost twice the amount legally zoned, only 42 of those units, which is less than 15%, are deemed a low affordable housing. So what I'm trying to understand is, why is Goodson projecting something that's 283 units versus a projected yield of 149? And I understand the bonus density laws, but looking at some bonus density from charts from some reputable lawyers, it looks like based on a 15% affordable housing requirement for low income housing, that the most they could do is maybe additional 27% above the R30. So why are we looking at a proposal that's 190% of R30? Plus also we've had difficulty in any commitment from the city to enforce the CEQA requirements or the traffic planning requirements for that site. And anybody who lives in Leavenhaven knows that that Rancho Santa Fe stretch that is very difficult to traverse during rush hour, taking upwards of 20 minutes sometimes to go a mile from the south end to the north end of Rancho Santa Fe Road during rush hour. Now, I guess also the second question is what is the city counting on from that property for the HCD compliance? I'm not sure, are they counting on the units as specified by the developer? So 42 units, or are they basing it on some calculation based on the zoned max of 149 units? Is there anybody that can answer that question on this call right now? I guess not.
So William, we don't have a back and forth during public comment.
Okay, I'm sorry about that.
So the public speaker can make their full comment, and then.
Okay, I will continue on then. So again, my fundamental requirement or question is what's being used for the housing plan? Is it what the developer submitted as 42 that's going into our supposed buffer of 855 units? Or is it some other number that's based on the original R30 rezone that was done in 2017? And if not,
3 minutes.
I'll just finish. If not, I'm just asking is, we have no recourse as citizens to prohibit because of this bonus density and HCD housing compliance issue to restrict anything that the developer is submitting? Or are we subject to lawsuits because of our position being non-compliant? I just feel like the citizens are really in a catch-22.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Fleck.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Doug Waringa. Doug, you do have 3 minutes. You can start when ready.
Hi, my name is Doug Wieringa. My wife, young children, and I live in Northwest Leucadia for the last 18 years. I want to thank you all for your time and your service. I was really happy to hear the city's adoption of equity as a guiding principle, including establishment of an equity committee. Of course, equity means different things to different people. To me, it provides hope that our West La Costa Avenue corridor will, like other Encinitas neighborhoods, also have safe mobility infrastructure to access nearby amenities like our beautiful ocean and beach and the new Alila Maria resort. I want to comment on the Maria Village environmental impact report that just came out. I noticed that none of the 16 priority analyses address our community's concerns surrounding mobility and traffic safety. Transportation relates, but indirectly at best. Could the City and Planning Committee please reinforce the need for every proposed project to address mobility and traffic safety within their environmental impact studies and thus their project plans? While each developer can only consider impact of its own project, it is the city's duty to consider the projects holistically and their collective impacts to our community. Yep. You've already heard about some of that in terms of projected traffic on La Costa Avenue tonight from Darcy and Patricia. It's my hope that the city's commitment to equity will make all of Encinitas a better place. Given all the proposed high density projects in Northwest Leucadia, let's immediately bring this zone up to safety and mobility standards established in other Encinitas neighborhoods. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Doug. And our final speaker is Bob Kent. Bob, you can start when ready.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, City Council members, and Planning Commission members. My name is Bob Kent, Encinitas resident. On behalf of Keys for Homes, we support your efforts to adopt a compliant 6-cycle housing element update that will focus on truly moving the needle in the actual building of more affordable homes in Encinitas. We understand there's no one single solution or silver bullet here, so we support the city's efforts to bolster the many tools required to build more affordable housing, including, number one, the requirement that the affordable units be actually built on all 15 housing element sites. Number two, ADUs and smaller unit types. We encourage the city to develop and implement a plan so that financing can be provided for ADUs to incentivize and ensure long-term affordability. And number three, inclusionary housing, taking a look at our inclusionary housing program by increasing the percentage of affordable housing for residential development if economically feasible and not a disincentive to building affordable homes. We also support the city's recent commitment to pursue the building of a 100% or as close as possible affordable community for our seniors and family residents, as well as for our essential workers who are commuting long distances or finding difficult living situations to stay here in the city they serve. Any new site should focus on utilizing and or monetizing city, county, or other government-owned land as a path to building a model affordable community. Especially since we live in a high land cost area, the city, and to the extent it has partners in this endeavor, must have financial skin in the game to leverage additional financing required to achieve this objective. We respectfully request that as you thread this needle and balance often competing interests, please adopt policies that create incentives and programs to encourage affordable housing opportunities that fit well in our neighborhoods across the income spectrum, whether it be for a senior living on a fixed income of $35,000, a single parent raising their child making $45,000, a recent college graduate earning $65,000, or a family of four making $90,000. Lastly, as you navigate forward on this housing plan and all its complexities, the private sector cannot solve our housing affordability crisis on its own. Public-private engagement, collaboration, and innovation is an essential component for successfully creating affordable housing opportunities here in Encinitas. Thank you for your efforts and commitment. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. And Mayor, that does conclude speakers.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to all the public speakers. There were a couple questions or comments that I just wanted to get a couple of clarifying answers to. So one of the public speakers talked about not allowing in lieu fees. And I believe that none of these housing element sites allow in lieu fees at all. So could staff just clarify that point, please?
Yes, that's correct. The R30 sites, in lieu fees would not be applicable. All affordable units would need to be constructed on site.
Okay, so yeah, just to clarify, what we're talking about tonight is the sixth cycle of the housing element. Every single property that is in the sixth cycle will have to provide the affordable units on site together with the market rate units. So there is no way to buy your way out of it. So that's basically been handled. So just to make sure that's really clear. And then the other thing, I wondered if Barbara Couts, our attorney, could address the statement from a speaker, and we've heard this a number of times recently, that we could declare a moratorium on development of these sites or any sites because of an imminent threat to health and safety from the traffic or other result of building. Could you just address the legality of that?
Well, the state has substantially limited the city's ability to do so. The city can no longer impose a moratorium on any kind of housing development. So the city could still impose a moratorium on commercial development, but cannot impose any limitation on housing development other than to specifically protect against an imminent threat to the health and safety of persons residing in or within the immediate vicinity of the area subject to the moratorium. And in addition, HCD must approve the moratorium before it can become effective. So unless you can identify an imminent threat, what would I see? A landslide, something, landslide. Anyway, it has to be an imminent threat. And HCD must approve it.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilmember Mosca.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. I was wondering if just in response to one of our public speakers tonight, William Fleck, I was wondering if we could have Jennifer Gates just give her email address so that Mr. Fleck can connect with Jennifer on his questions, because we didn't really respond to his questions. And so I want to make sure that our staff is reaching out to Mr. Fleck on his questions.
Sure. So you can email me at jgates@encinitasca.gov. And my email address is also on the Housing Element Project webpage. There is a link to my email address on that as well. Or you can email the city clerk and she will forward the emails to me.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I just wanted to make some, I guess, closing comments and do what the mayor had asked us to do, which is focus on the specific questions before us. And focusing on the specific questions, I think that the first kind of idea that comes to mind is that we need further dialogue. We need further discussion. Because I think when I look at this letter from HCD and the questions that they've raised, I'm not sure of any other input that I can give, but for the fact that we need to go back and have further dialogue with HCD about what we can do here. And let me break it down even further. When I look at program 2D and the state density bonus law, this was a very deliberative process. We had guidance and advice from legal counsel every step of the way. And so everything that you see, put together was with advice and consent of counsel. And we believe, speaking for myself, that this is actually incentivizing affordable housing in our city. And so on program 2D, I think that I'm not necessarily sure why we got the response from HCD. And so the only thing I can say with regard to Program 2D is that we're further engaging HCD to understand, where the impasse is here. When I look at Program 2E, I mean, this has been, I know that Deputy Mayor Kranz can probably speak more eloquently and deeper about this ordinance than I can, but this ordinance, gosh, I've been on the council for over 4 years now, and this is something that our legal counsel has been tracking in the city of Costa Mesa and throughout the state of California for well over 4 years. And the ordinance that we adopted was with respect to advice from legal counsel. And I would add that the legal counsel of 2 actual city attorneys. I mean, our prior city attorney was well versed in this and advising the city on this matter. And then our newest city attorneys who've really dug deep on this issue. And we were so careful to make sure that we're not discriminating and that we're structuring a program, an ordinance that makes sense for our city and empowers our residents, and also gives accommodations for those that are looking to take advantage of that law. And so I don't know what we do. I mean, this is again an ordinance that was very carefully structured, and the law is very clear. And of course, if the law changed on appeal, Costa Mesa case changed on appeal, we would obviously change the law consistent with what the appellate court would hand down. And I do. I think those are the real substantive ones I see in the HCD letter. But what I would suggest is that we had some progress that was made the last time in the 5th cycle by sending some of our staff and my fellow colleagues up to Sacramento to visit with HCD and have a discussion. Perhaps we can't go up to Sacramento this time, but maybe what we need to do is have a similar situation where a couple of my colleagues here are able to sit down with HCD and some staff and our attorneys and just work through these issues, because I'm not sure exactly where we go looking at this HCD letter. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Kranz.
Yes, thanks. And, I don't know that I'd be more eloquent than Joe, but that was the head scratcher for me, is some of the language that was in the HCD letter just seemed pretty fundamental to the city staff and city attorney's efforts to make sure that the actions that we were taking were in compliance with the law. So I don't know if maybe Barbara or somebody has some insight on what HCD, how it is that they could put that pen to paper and send that when it seems so evident that the efforts that we went through with our city attorney's office to make sure that we were in compliance with the law, what they've stated in their letter seems just, such a remarkable contrast with just basic lawyer 101.
Well, I can only comment on the density bonus legalities. I see Barry Schultz is here from your city attorney's office to discuss the group home ordinance. I would just say that the issues discussed in HCD's letter on the density bonus, none of them are the subject of any case law and represent HCD's view. Which we disagree with. I am not, as I said, none of these issues have been litigated. They're not clear in the law. We thought they were fairly clear, but HCD in some cases disagrees, and we drafted a rather lengthy response to the December 16th letter. But anyway, HCD seems quite determined that the ordinance adopted by the council, regardless of what we think, is an impediment to your getting a certified housing element. So I think, we are happy to discuss with them and see if we can better understand their viewpoint and see what the city could do to get a certified housing element.
Barry, could you speak to the issue of HCD's comment regarding the group home ordinance?
Sure. I can't speak to their motivations, but what I can speak to is the effort that we made to craft a ordinance that we believed would stand up on legal grounds. We modeled much of the ordinance on Costa Mesa and some other jurisdictions. We think that number one, the ordinance does not prohibit group homes, so we don't see discrimination there. Secondly, we can provide reasonable regulations of homes that are not licensed by the state. So we feel very comfortable that the regulation that we recommended to you and that you adopted will stand the legal scrutiny. And obviously we're waiting for the appeal decision in the Costa Mesa case. And should that surprise us, then we'll have to go back to the drawing board and address it. But at this point, we feel very comfortable that what you have adopted will stand the test of a legal challenge.
Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Hensy.
I'll just give my closing comments too. And, you know, I think my top priority is that we get a certified housing element before its due date and that we do all that we can to make that happen for the city. That being said, you know, we spent so much time crafting our local density bonus ordinance so that it would fit and it would work here and it would achieve the goal that we have to create more affordable housing, as well as the sober living homes ordinance. So, you know, part of the reason why I'm so interested in getting back-to-back certified housing elements is because so much of these little questions we're dealing with today that are quite big questions are because we have the lens of the state scrutiny so close on Encinitas right now. And so I think in getting our next housing element, we'll probably have more discretion to make our own local ordinances fit to what our community wants. So we have had productive dialogues with HCD in the past. You know, they issue their concerns and we take those concerns very seriously, and we have a deliberative discussion as we're having right now with our legal representation and, you know, 9 people who represent the community here today to talk it through. So while I think that's really worthwhile, I do hope there are certain elements of both the density bonus ordinance and our sober living homes that we can keep intact. But if there are things that we need to change that would maintain some local control for us, have the ability to tailor these to Encinitas, but also satisfy the state's requirements that we're not discriminating, I'm very interested in doing that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Commissioner Farrow, and then I'll go to you, Commissioner Doyle.
All right, thank you. Yeah, just a couple of quick comments on the density bonus law. I think part of the problem is how the density bonus law is written in terms of gross density. They don't use a gross acreage calculation. So I think we're in good position with that. Second, just in general, I think you got the flavor of my concerns about spot zoning and locating auto-reliant developments throughout the city. And I would hope that when we have this update in 2025, we could propose more innovative housing options that might account for downzoning or upzoning and put that housing where it kind of makes sense. But otherwise, I think, you know, this document's kind of baked. It's a good document. I think it's well crafted by staff. I want to compliment them on it. And I too feel that we should move this forward now and then move on to the next step of crafting a better housing element, or a housing element that as Councilmember Hinza said, really does kind of address more of the concerns of the community and get ahead of it this time instead of being so reactive. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Doyle.
Thank you. I'm glad you asked us to focus on the February 4th letter, because that's where I put all of my efforts. And basically we had the element 2D, the density bonus ordinance, 2E, the group homes, special housing. And I also focused in a little bit on 3F, where we were looking at they apparently had objections to our CPP process. Now, in terms of the density bonus ordinance, I mean, we've discussed and fought very hard for the net versus gross acreage. And I know that in the course of our discussions, it was pointed out that some cities have gotten in trouble trying to play games that way. And what they do is they fall back to the general plan. And general plan for Encinitas is very, very specific on use of net acreage. And I also, in terms of dealing with HCD, it feels fair to point out that every site in our adequate sites list, all of the numbers that are put out there are for net acreage. They're net acreage at 25 units per acre. So this is where we're ending up with a lot of the feedback and the blowback from our residents when they say, what the heck just happened? How did it go from 150 to 240? And it's not every one of the lots, but that one thing is worth fighting for. And I think Barbara came up with a brilliant summation of how we came to that. Now, when I look further at the group homes section, now, one of the things they brought up was that it explicitly targets persons with disabilities and imposes different requirements on a protected class. And as I dug through this, if we had to give something back, I know we have the parking restrictions. It's 9.39050D. That's where we say you have to park within 500 feet of the unit. Thing is, when I look at this one, we have the group home, which is a business, and we have the group homes residents and the residents, we can't treat them any differently. The business as a business needs to be treated differently. It's a business. We need that. So it's perfectly within our rights to insist on an on-site manager, the 650-foot buffer, the parking for requirements for residents, I thought could be seen as overreach. And I think they kind of flagged us on that. They went over a lot of different other things, the good neighbor policy, et cetera, but I don't think that was an issue, or it shouldn't be. When it came to element 3, program 3F, seek to create community support at a variety of income levels. And their idea was that we should not invite the public's input on by right projects because they might become frustrated and disenfranchised when we don't listen to their subjective comments. And that is just so alien, so wrong for Encinitas. I mean, we built this city from the get-go on a very, very active populace that has a lot to say, and smart people who are aware of this neighborhood, and they frequently come up with ideas and concepts that we haven't thought of. I mean, we're all in this very deep, but we're not automatically the smartest people in the universe. We have a lot of smart people here, and I want to keep hearing from them. And that part I actually got huffy on. I felt insulted on behalf of our people. It's like, oh, they might become frustrated and feel disenfranchised, but this is how Encinitas was made, and this is how it was built. And really, those were the 3 things I wanted to drill into, and that's what I wanted to say.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the specificity. Commissioner Ehlers.
Yeah, I want to echo exactly what Kevin said. I think he said exactly what I would have said about the density bonus and the group home law. I think we crafted it. I was very happy to read that staff supported essentially staying the course. I wanted to add a little more on the CPP and maybe a little more ammunition that might help you, help staff in the future. I remember, so I was one of the original proponents of the CPP back in the day, what, 20 some years ago, 2001 or 2, whenever it was. And the staff actually did a report 1 year after CPP was implemented, and 2 years, they did a postmortem. And it came back, they interviewed both the applicants and the residents. Both came back with very positive results. Why? Because when you're in that application stage, so many of the easy to fix issues that cause opposition to projects, and after all, that's what we're trying to do is streamline projects, go away. And so I think if we went back and we pulled that information out and said, hey, this is the history here, and this is why it is a good thing, and it actually is a streamlining process. And you know, and I'll use Goodson as a Goodson project as maybe a bad example, because that wasn't a true CPP in that it didn't, the applicant was not accepting input. There were systemic methods used to prevent it. So it wasn't a good example, but I think in general, the CPP will help reduce opposition to projects. It gets more information out. And as Kevin said, you know, it's deeply ingrained in our psyche here. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Commissioner Sherrod.
Thank you, Mayor. I think that this proposal, we do need to go forward as Brett said and others have said. And I think it's a very good response to HCD's letter. I think that the net acreage is a super important part of it. And the response to that I saw was really detailed, and it does address HCD's concern that we never previously had stipulated whether it was gross or net. And I think that all of our general plan, it's conforming. So I'm really, really happy to see that that's a detailed response. I think it's commendable that this council did come into compliance with the plan in 2019, in fall of 2019. And I think we need to move on this because we do only have 2 months.
Okay, well, thank you. And I appreciate all those comments and the clarity from, it seems like almost everybody, that we do need to move forward with this process in a timely manner. And we also, if there are things around the edges that are important to HCD, that we would be open to considering some of those. But there are the core of the thing that we're really pretty committed to. And I think our attorneys have done a really great job of articulating what those are. And there are times, I mean, the CPP is a great example of, there are times when there are really conflicting value structures that seem to be suggested, because there are a lot of different instances where the city is being asked to provide more information to the public, to have a better process that's more inclusive, that reaches hard to reach people, and to have a CPP process in and of itself, as was mentioned, does reduce conflicts and does make the process go in a more streamlined way, because the public can speak to the developer directly. And so we've seen that be very successful, and I'm grateful to Commissioner Ehlers for helping spearhead and create that in our city 19 years ago. And I mean, there'd be no explanation for removing that. I mean, even after having a CPP process, the development services director could still approve a project if that was a required project by right. But requiring the developer to have a meeting with the public that's directly around it, you know, that's just clearly is a best practice. And if anything, other communities should adopt that. But I think, and then the other thing that was mentioned specifically, the 500 feet, I mean, there might be around the sober living, it's always hard for me to tell sometimes where HCD is throwing a lot of things out there to see what sticks, and sometimes overreaching. I mean, there are definitely times when we have been asked to do things that just are outside of what their purview is and are clearly allowed in other sections. Like, for example, the thing about HCD's manual actually saying that the Planning Commission can have design review, and them asking to take out Planning Commission review. So I think that having our staff and potentially representatives from the council travel to HCD if that's needed, or also involving the Attorney General where that's needed. I mean, we are in a lawsuit with the state, and you know, it's always possible to amend our complaint and say that we have complied and we are expecting them to certify our housing element, and just be really clear about where we are legally. I think we have excellent, the highest level attorneys, and great advice and deep knowledge here. And so I am hopeful that HCD will certify our housing element. We've put tremendous effort into it. We are all trying to achieve HCD's goals, which are to have more affordable housing and to have a compliant housing element. And at the end of the day, I think HCD could use the city of Encinitas instead of as a target, as a poster child of a city that has really come together to try to make a plan that is acceptable and compliant and achieves those goals in an expeditious way. So I am hopeful that 2 months from now and in the months after that, when HCD is certifying it, we'll have success. But I think for now, it seems like the planning staff has the feedback they need, and we will kick it to the Planning Commission to deal with the next round. Do you want to say anything else, Jennifer?
I wonder if Amy Flicker had ever solved her technical difficulties.
Is that Tony?
Oh, it's working.
I'm here. I've been here the whole time.
Okay, good to see you.
I'm wondering if we should just, for the sake of ease, we should identify a couple of council members that could work with staff, just in case they interact with HCD and they're open to a discussion. Perhaps we can do like what we did before. So just identify council members now so that staff can work with a couple people.
Commissioner Ehlers has his hand up again. Yes.
Yeah, like the Housing Element Task Force, I'd volunteer for that too, if you wanted to put somebody from the Planning Commission also in there. And especially given the past history I have with going with Robin Huntley and with there. And I also think, and we're not going to talk about it tonight, but the whole Prop A issue, obviously I represent a constituency that certainly deserves some representation at the table.
Okay, sounds good. I'm not sure how likely it is that this will be needed, but we'll take your nomination under consideration. I think the informal subcommittee, it had been, I think it had been Jody and Kelly. And so I think we had substituted me into Jody's position. So it's Kelly and me. And then Bruce, and if there's another commissioner who's interested, we can always make that happen if it works out. So Jennifer, did you have any other final comments?
I just wanted to clarify that the direction at this time is to not make any modifications to the density bonus or the group home permit programs, and that there would be a follow-up discussion with potentially the Attorney Generals and HCD on what they are specifically most concerned about, that we would maybe bring back amendments to those ordinances as identified with city councils.
I mean, I don't think it was quite that clear. My feeling about it was a bit more nuanced, that there should be a dialogue with HCD after this round of letters to see if there are things that are important to them that we feel could be modified without basically rescinding the whole thing. I think we're not saying we're not going to consider any changes. This is it. I think there's still this negotiation period, but there's a generalized consensus that we're committed to the core of these things.
Okay.
Does that sound right, everybody?
Yes.
Okay.
That sounds good to me. And I'm wondering if we could have Barbara just chime in terms of whether that's clear direction, because I would like to have Barbara kind of lead any kind of discussion with HCD along with our staff.
Yes, I mean, I think that's reasonably clear. I think that's as clear directions until we talk to them.
Do you feel that that's solid, Barbara?
That what's solid?
What the direction we're headed?
Yes. I mean, I think the direction is that you would like to retain the core of both ordinances and have some discussions with HCD about whether it's possible to get a certified housing element, given that.
Okay.
Does that express it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then with the other programs and recommendations, staff will move forward as proposed.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, great. Seems very productive, and it's been a great pleasure. I just want to say how much I really admire the work of this Planning Commission and also your dedication. I think you all put in a lot of time and effort and thought and bring a great knowledge and background to this job. And, there's always a variety on the Planning Commission, but we have a really great group right now. So thank you for what you're doing. All of you really make a difference for us. So with that, we are adjourned. Have a good rest of the night.